On August 17, 1993, a Tuesday with mild weather and typical Recife drizzle, the couple Augusto and Helena Mendonça, along with their 5-year-old son Lucas, disappeared without a trace from their apartment in the Boa Viagem neighborhood in Recife, Pernambuco. The disappearance caught attention not only because of the involvement of a child, but also due to the profile of the couple. Augusto, 37 years old, was an accountant at a large construction company, and Helena, 35 years old, worked as a university professor at UFPE, where she taught Brazilian history. The day started like any other for the Mendonça family. According to reports from the nanny, Dona Josefa Almeida, 58 years old, who had worked for the family for 3 years. Augusto left for work around 7:30 a.m. As usual, Helena dropped off Lucas at school at 8:15 a.m. and headed to the university, where she would teach until 2 p.m. The last person to see Lucas was his kindergarten teacher, Marcia Cavalcanti, who handed him over to his mother at the school gate at 5:45 p.m. Helena seemed normal. We talked about the science fair happening. The following week, Lucas was excited, showing a drawing he had made. Marcia said in her initial statement to the police, the first indication that something was wrong came the following morning when Lucas did not show up at school. The educational coordinator, Senior Ribeiro, tried to contact Helena by phone, but got no response. On the same day, Augusto did not show up at work, which was completely out of character, according to his supervisor, Ricardo Menezes. The alarm was finally raised when Cecilia Mendonça, Helena's mother, unable to reach her daughter for 2 days, went to the apartment on the night of August 19th. Using the spare key she had, she entered the apartment and found a disturbing scene. The house was in perfect order, with no signs of a struggle or forced entry, but there were clear signs of a hasty departure. In the couple's bedroom, some drawers were partially open, and in the closet, pieces of clothing were missing. In Lucas's room, his favorite teddy bear, which, according to his grandmother, never left the boy's bed, was gone, along with his blue school backpack. The civil police of Pernambuco immediately began searching after the disappearance was reported. Detective Roberto Almeida, from the Missing Persons Division, led the initial operation. We have 3 possible scenarios: a kidnapping that was not reported, a voluntary disappearance of the couple with the child, or something more serious that we cannot yet determine, stated the detective in a press conference on August 20th. First 72 hours were crucial. Police teams searched the apartment for evidence, interviewed neighbors, colleagues, and family members. The family car, a 1991 navy blue Mansa, was also missing. An alert was issued across the Northeast with the VEHICLE's details and family photos. The lack of a ransom request weakened the kidnapping theory. Checking the couple's bank accounts revealed that 2 days before the disappearance, Augusto had withdrawn a considerable sum, approximately 15,000 reals, a significant amount for the time and part of his savings, reinforcing the hypothesis of a planned departure. If you want to follow more cases like this that shake society and reveal hidden truths, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any investigations in the weeks following the Mendonça disappearance. The police established a timeline of the family's last days. More detailed interrogations revealed troubling information. Augusto's colleagues mentioned that he had been tense and distant in the weeks prior. According to Marcelo Alves, an accountant who shared an office with Augusto, he had received phone calls that visibly made him nervous. On one occasion, Marcelo overheard him saying, "I can't do this," before abruptly hanging up. Helena also showed signs of unease. Her department colleague, Professor Regina Campos, reported that Helena had requested unpaid leave 2 weeks before the disappearance, something she had never done in her 12 years at the institution. The request was still under review, and had not been approved when she disappeared. A disturbing discovery came when the police found the Mendonca family's Monza abandoned in the parking lot of Recife's Gararapes International Airport 5 days after the disappearance. The vehicle was clean, with no useful fingerprints, the documents in the glove compartment, and no personal belongings. A check of flight records revealed that no tickets had been purchased in any of the Mendonca's names for that date. However, the airport security system was poor in 1993, with few cameras and frequent recording failures. The possibility that they had used fake documents to board could not be ruled out. The first major obstacle in the investigation came when, after 3 months of intense searching, Detective Roberto Almeida was transferred to another division, and the case was handed over to Detective Paulo Vieira. The transition caused delays and the loss of some important information. Vieira decided to explore a new angle: Augusto's professional life. Augusto worked in the finance department of one of the largest construction companies in the state, at a time when several corruption charges related to public tenders were beginning to emerge, explained Detective Vieira. We needed to check if he might have had access to compromising information. The construction company Nordist vehemently denied any wrongdoing and stated that Augusto was an exemplary employee with no access to strategic information. However, a thorough search of Augusto's work computer, authorized by the court 6 months after the disappearance, revealed that he had accessed several files related to government contracts in the weeks before his disappearance. In April 1994, the investigation hit a setback when a witness, Josu Ferreira, a taxi driver, claimed to have driven a family resembling the Mendoncas to a guest house in Porto de Galinhas, a coastal town in southern Pernambuco, on the day of the disappearance. Teams were mobilized only to discover that it was another family with no connection to the case. At the same time, rumors began to circulate. Neighbors speculated about marital problems, hidden debts, and even possible involvement with unconventional religious cults. I saw them leaving late at night, sometimes with the boy, sleeping in their arms. They were going somewhere that didn't seem normal, said a neighbor who preferred to remain anonymous. The investigation faced another significant obstacle when, in November 1994, a fire hit part of the police department's archives, damaging some of the case's evidence. Although the main documents had been preserved in newly implemented digital copies at the time, materials such as original photographs and some cassette tape testimonies were lost. In the following years, the investigation continued, but with decreasing intensity. Detective Vieira kept the case open, periodically revisiting it and following up on new leads that occasionally arose. In 1996, 3 years after the disappearance, a woman from João Pessoa, Paraíba, reported having seen a boy who closely resembled Lucas at a mall in the city. An investigation was initiated, but the child turned out to be the son of a local couple with no connection to the Mendonca, as in Pisiquí. 5 years after the disappearance, the case was formally transferred to the Unsolved Cases Division, under the supervision of Detective Sandra Ferreira, who had specialized in long-duration disappearances. She developed a new strategy to reevaluate the case from scratch using more advanced technologies and modern investigative methods. The 2000s brought new possibilities for the Mendonca case. With the advancement of investigative technologies and the establishment of national databases for missing persons, Detective Ferreira was able to broaden the scope of the search. In 2001, she ordered the digitalization of all remaining photographs of the family and the creation of age-progressed images of Lucas, who would have been 13 at the time. A significant breakthrough occurred in 2003 when an audit of the accounts of Nordist Construction, Augusto's former employer, revealed irregularities in contracts. From 1990 to 1993, 3 former directors were indicted for bid rigging. Although Augusto's name did not appear directly in the proceedings, one of the indicted individuals, in a confidential statement, mentioned that an accountant had threatened to expose the scheme shortly before mysteriously disappearing. At the same time, the federal police, which had taken over the investigation into the corruption crimes, shared information with Detective Ferreira's team. A confidential report suggested that Augusto may have discovered the irregularities and, fearing for his safety and that of his family, chose to disappear. "We may be dealing with a case of self-preservation, not of flight due to guilt," explained Ferreira in an interview years later. The hypothesis was that Augusto might have entered into an informal protection program, possibly even abroad. In 2005, a promising lead emerged when Argentine authorities reported the identification of a Brazilian using fake documents in Buenos Aires. The man, who presented himself as Roberto Campos, had physical characteristics similar to Augusto's. However, when Argentine police located him, it turned out to be another Brazilian fugitive with no connection to the Mendonça case. The most impactful testimony came in 2008 when Martha Guzman, a former secretary at the Nordist Construction Company, contacted the police after returning to Brazil. She had moved to Portugal in 1994 and claimed to have seen Augusto being threatened by then financial director Carlos Eduardo Mota 2 weeks before the disappearance. He said something like, "You and your family will regret it if this leaks," she recalled in her official statement. "At the time, I didn't understand the seriousness, but after I learned about the disappearance, I got scared, and that's why I left the country," Martha said. Carlos Eduardo Mota, who had passed away in 2008, could not be questioned about these allegations. However, the police obtained permission to examine his phone records from that time and discovered several calls to the Mendonças home phone in the days leading up to their disappearance. In 2010, the investigation gained new momentum when the TV national program Brasileiros Desaparecidos aired a special report about the case. After the broadcast, a woman from Foz do Iguaçu, Paraná, contacted the police, claiming she had been a neighbor to a Brazilian family resembling the Mendonças in Ciudad del Este, Paraguay, between 1994 and 1996. They were very private, hardly socialized. The boy rarely went out to play. One day, they just moved without saying goodbye, she reported. Paraguayan police collaborated on the investigation, but the immigration records from that time were inadequate, and the lead cooled. Never give up on the truth if you believe all missing persons deserve to be found, the commentator urged. In 2015, the case gained international attention when Interpol included the Mendonças on its list of missing persons with possible connections to white-collar crimes. This decision followed Operation Alicerce, which investigated corruption schemes in public works in Brazil, revealing documents suggesting that Augusto could have been a key witness to frauds in the early 90s. Helena's family, which had never stopped searching for answers, hired a private detective, Ricardo Fontes, a former federal police officer with experience in international cases. Fontes developed a theory that the couple might be living under new identities in a Latin American country. There are patterns in voluntary disappearances. The choice of the airport to abandon the car, the specific removal of personal items, the lack of communication with loved ones, even after so much time, all point to a careful and permanent plan. Fontes explained in his preliminary report. In 2017, a disturbing discovery shook the existing theories. During expansion work on a rural property in the outskirts of Gravata, a mountain town 80 kilometers from Recife, workers found human remains buried in a remote area. Preliminary forensic analysis indicated that the remains belonged to an adult man and woman, buried approximately 25 years ago. The news stirred public attention and speculation. The estimated age of the remains and the burial period matched the Mendonças' disappearance. However, DNA testing, compared with samples from Helena's parents and Augusto's brother, revealed that the remains did not belong to the missing couple. It was a moment of relief and at the same time frustration, said Cecilia Mendonca, who was 82 years old at the time. On one hand, we held on to the hope that they were still alive. On the other, we continued without answers. The investigation into the remains found created a separate case, which was eventually linked to the disappearance of a farming couple in 1992, under completely different circumstances. In 2018, marking the 25th anniversary of the disappearance, the family launched a national campaign with digitally updated projections of how Lucas would look as an adult. The campaign, which went viral on social media, generated hundreds of leads, all carefully checked by the police and Detective Fontes team. One of the most intriguing leads came from a bank employee in the interior of Minas Gerais, who claimed to have served a man who closely resembled the adult projection of Lucas. According to the employee, the man seemed nervous when opening an account and presented newly issued documents. When the police arrived at the agency, the client had already closed the account after only 3 weeks, leaving no valid contact address. Detective Ferreira, nearing retirement, decided to make one final concentrated effort. In 2019, she gathered a special team of young police officers specializing in technology and veterans with experience in complex cases. The goal was to review all the material using data analysis technologies to identify previously unnoticed connections. This effort resulted in a new profile of the case. The team concluded that there was a 70% chance that the disappearance had been voluntary, initially motivated by threats related to Augusto's job, but later the family might have opted to maintain new identities for unknown reasons. On the morning of March 12, 2021, a man of approximately 33 years old entered the missing persons department in Recife. He was alone, dressed simply but cleanly, and carried only a small backpack. He approached the service desk and handed the attendant a yellow envelope containing a birth certificate from 1988 in the name of Lucas Mendonca, son of Augusto and Helena, and an expired child's identity card. The desk officer, Sergeant Marcos Paulo, initially confused, quickly realized the magnitude of the situation. "Are you Lucas Mendonca?" he asked, receiving only a slight nod in response. The man didn't say a word. The news spread quickly. Detective Ferreira, already retired, was contacted immediately and arrived at the police station within an hour. Lucas's maternal grandparents, Cecilia and Antonio Mendonca, already elderly, were notified with caution due to their advanced age and the potential emotional impact. The man claiming to be Lucas underwent DNA testing, which confirmed his identity 5 days later. He was indeed the boy who had disappeared 28 years earlier, now an adult. However, a mystery remained. Lucas remained silent. Preliminary medical evaluations found no physical issues preventing him from speaking. A multidisciplinary team was formed, including psychologists, psychiatrists, and trauma specialists. Forensic psychologist Tentra Lusana Campos, designated as the lead on the case, explained, "We are dealing with a possible case of severe selective mutism, likely triggered by traumatic experiences. We don't know what Lucas went through in those 28 years, but his silence is eloquent." Lucas communicated through simple gestures and eventually began to write small notes. He confirmed his identity in writing, but refused to provide any information about his parents or what had happened since 1993. The only information he offered was that he had lived in many places and had been alone for a long time. The reunion with his grandparents was emotional and complex. Cecilia, 85 years old, hugged her grandson in tears, while Antonio, 87, looked on in astonishment at the transformation of his grandson, whom he had only known as a small child. Lucas seemed to recognize them with a brief smile the first. clear emotional expression since his return. A search of national and international databases found no records of Lucas Mendonça in the last 28 years. There were no identity cards, CPF, Brazilian tax number, passports, school records, or employment history. It was as if he had existed in an administrative vacuum for nearly 3 decades. Through written notes, Lucas indicated that he didn't know the whereabouts of his parents. When asked directly whether they were alive or dead, he simply wrote, "I don't know. It's been many years." 6 months after his return, Lucas began working with a therapist specialized in nonverbal communication and trauma, Dr. Marina Ribeiro. Using specific techniques, he gradually provided more information, always in writing or using cards with images. An incomplete picture began to form. Lucas revealed that the family had initially fled to Paraguay using fake documents provided by his father's friends. They lived in Ciudad del Este for about 3 years, where his father worked as an accountant for local merchants, and his mother gave private Portuguese lessons. Dad was always looking over his shoulder. "We were constantly moving houses," Lucas wrote during one of the sessions. When asked why they fled, he indicated that his father knew things that powerful people wanted to hide. In 1997, the family moved to rural Argentina, where they lived for another 5 years. It was during this period that Lucas, then a teenager, began attending school regularly, although using false documentation. "My name was Miguel Sanchez. I learned Spanish perfectly. I made some friends, but we could never bring anyone home." He wrote, "The most disturbing information came when Lucas finally revealed that in 2002, when he was 14 years old, his parents disappeared again. This time, so did he. They went to meet someone in Buenos Aires. They said they would return in 2 days. I never saw them again." Lucas was taken in by a neighboring couple who eventually helped him obtain Argentine documents as Miguel Sanchez, supposedly an orphan. He completed his basic education and worked various informal jobs. At 22, he moved to Chile, then Peru, and finally Bolivia, always maintaining a low profile. "I always knew who I really was. I kept my original documents all these years. Mom made me promise never to lose them," he wrote. When asked what motivated him to return to Brazil after so many years, Lucas wrote, "I dreamt about my mother for 3 nights in a row. In the dream, she said it was time to come back. I was also tired of living like a ghost." The Brazilian police, in collaboration with Argentine authorities, began searching for the Mendonça couple based on new information. Records of unidentified and missing persons in Argentina between 2002 and 2003 were reviewed. However, without precise information about the false identities they had used, the search presented huge challenges. Regarding Lucas' mutism, experts theorized that it might be related to a trauma associated with the disappearance of his parents, which he might have witnessed, or the accumulated stress of decades living under false identities in constant fear. The brain develops protective mechanisms in the face of severe trauma, explained Dr. Ribeiro. Lucas' mutism could be a form of protection against painful memories or information he considers dangerous to verbalize. If you've watched this far, it's because you care about these cases that mark families forever. Leave a comment saying, "I watched until the end to get to know you and see who truly cares about the search for the truth." Lucas' return prompted a deep reassessment of the original case. Retired Delegate Ferreira was invited to act as a special consultant in the renewed investigation. The team focused on 2 main goals: locating Augusto and Helena, if they were still alive, and fully understanding the reasons that led to their original disappearance. The surviving executives of the Northeast Construction Company were re-interrogated. Company documents, archived for decades, were reanalyzed with modern forensic technologies. The investigation revealed that between 1991 in 1993, the construction company was involved in a scheme of overpricing in public works, which moved amounts equivalent to millions of current reais. In parallel, Lucas continued his therapeutic process. After a year of his return, he began to make some sounds in simple words. His first audible thank you, directed at his grandmother Cecilia during a Sunday lunch, brought tears to all present. Lucas was legally reintegrated into Brazilian society, receiving new documents and recovering his original identity. His grandparents transferred a small savings account to his name, which they had kept for decades, waiting for the family's return. With these resources, Lucas rented a modest apartment in the same Boa Viagem neighborhood, not far from where he had spent his early childhood. In 2022, a disturbing discovery emerged. Hospital records in Mendoza, Argentina, revealed that an unidentified woman with characteristics similar to Helena's had been treated in critical condition in September 2002, the victim of a car accident. The woman died without regaining consciousness and without identification, being buried as an indigent. Argentine authorities initiated the process of exhumation for DNA testing. As for Augusto, no concrete trace was found. However, a retired former officer from the federal police, who had been retired for years, confided to the investigative team that in 2003 he received unofficial information about a Brazilian who was murdered under suspicious circumstances in Salta, northern Argentina, possibly related to an old corruption scheme in Brazil. The body was never officially identified. When Lucas was informed of these discoveries, he broke his silence in a more significant way. In a session with Dr. Aduto Ecotra Ribeiro, he said in a low but clear voice, "I always knew they wouldn't come back. I felt when it happened." The case prompted deep reflections about witness protection systems in Brazil. Experts pointed out that in the early 1990s, witnesses to serious crimes had few institutional options for protection, often resorting to unofficial escapes and complete identity changes as their only means of survival. The Mendonça case exposes historical flaws in our justice and protection systems, stated Dr. Fernando Albuquerque, a professor of criminal law at USP. A whole family was forced to give up their social existence because the state could not guarantee their safety in the face of powerful economic interests. For Lucas, the future remains uncertain, but with signs of hope. He started educational update courses and showed an interest in photography, revealing a natural talent for the art. His progress in speech is slow but steady. In a rare written interview with a documentary filmmaker who is producing material about the case, Lucas shared, "For 28 years, I carried 3 people inside me. The Lucas the First was supposed to be, the Miguel I was forced to be, and the nameless man who wandered through South America. Now I'm trying to just be myself, whoever that may be." The Mendonça case remains technically open, now focused on confirming the identity of Helena's possible remains and searching for conclusive information about Augusto's fate. More importantly, it serves as a powerful reminder of the long-lasting impact of corruption and impunity on the lives of ordinary citizens. If you liked this real and impactful story, subscribe to the channel right now, leave a like, and share this video so more people can learn about Brazilian cases that reveal so much about our society and our justice system. Thank you for following along until the end. And remember, the truth always finds a way to come to light, even if it takes 28 years.